Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Friday, July 5th, 2024. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today, NATO to give Ukraine $43 billion for 2025. So kind of similar to the first story I went over yesterday, this is about something that's going to be announced at the NATO summit next week. The last story was about how NATO is going to tell Ukraine that they're too corrupt to join the alliance. But despite that, they're going to spend $43 billion to give military aid to Ukraine. This was reported by Reuters. So NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, he was looking for the alliance to make a multi-year commitment to ensure long-term support for the proxy war, but the allies did not agree on that. Instead, they apparently agreed to this $43 billion for next year, and then they will reevaluate it each year, kind of what they're going to do for the following year. So the agreement says that NATO allies will aim to meet this pledge through proportionate contributions. So if the $43 billion is funded based on how much each member contributes to NATO, most of the burden would be on the U.S. since the U.S. pays for about 2/3 of the alliance's budget. So the details of this aren't exactly clear. I'm guessing the U.S. would have to pass some new Ukraine aid funding for this, but we don't really know the exact details. And this is just one of the many things that they're going to announce at that NATO summit next week. NATO is also going to station, or they're expected to announce that they'll station a civilian official in Kiev. They're going to start this new command in Germany to take some duties that the U.S. currently has overseeing the military aid. And they call this Trump-proofing. I would say, so one thing, we don't know what Trump's going to do. It's pretty discouraging to see him back the House Speaker Johnson as he put the Ukraine thing forward. But whenever you hear Trump talk about NATO, the one thing he says is that they have to pay more, like the European countries have to pay more. So I wouldn't see him going for this like set amount of NATO aid to Ukraine that, you know, if the U.S. is going to be the ones paying for most of it. But we'll see. Not all of this is nailed down or set in stone. Things could still change between now and what happens at the summit next week. So too corrupt to join, but don't worry, we'll still give you billions, tens of billions of dollars. All right, the next one here, Zelensky rejects the idea of a ceasefire with Russia. So Zelensky did an interview with Bloomberg on Wednesday, and he rejected the idea of a ceasefire. And this comes after Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban suggested the idea to him. So the Ukrainian leader said that he would not accept a ceasefire that leaves Russian forces in areas of Ukraine that they have captured, and said Russian President Vladimir Putin could not be trusted. Zelensky said, quote, "We cannot simply trust Putin in principle. We cannot trust him because he is a killer and the aggressor," end quote. And basically what Orban asked Zelensky was, you know, so you have this peace formula. This is Zelensky's plan. And it says no peace talks before a Russian withdrawal. I believe it also says they have to have war crimes tribunals. And Russia has to give up Crimea before they can even talk. So, I mean, it's just a complete non-starter, just kind of not a realistic plan here. And Orban did, when he got back to Hungary, he acknowledged that Zelensky was not enthusiastic about the idea that he put forward. So then on Thursday, Putin also discussed the idea of a ceasefire and also said that he could not agree to one with Ukraine because he wouldn't be sure if they would follow through, basically saying that they couldn't be trusted as well. So no good signs here for the prospects of a ceasefire. It doesn't seem to be in reach. He said, quote, "We can't allow the enemy to use this ceasefire to improve its situation, to arm itself, to reconstitute its army through forced mobilization, and to be ready to continue the armed conflict," end quote. So that was Putin. And Zelensky basically said the same thing. You know, Russia will take a ceasefire and use that to build up its forces. I never really got that talking point, from either side, because that means that you can do it too. It's not like one side is going to still be fighting a war. It's a ceasefire. But anyway, so in his interview, Zelensky also said that he wanted to see Trump's plan to end the war. Trump said during the debate that, I would end the war, whatever, but he's never articulated anything. And Zelensky's saying, show me your plan. And then Putin also discussed Trump and said that he believes Trump is sincere in his willingness to end the war. So we'll see. Putin also said recently that he would prefer Biden over Trump because Biden's more predictable, which is kind of funny. But now he's saying, he's not familiar with the proposals, whatever Trump's proposals are, that's very important, but that he's in favor of this idea, of course, of a potential future American president wanting to end this war in Ukraine. And throughout the war, the only time a real peace deal was on the table was back in March and April of 2022, but the U.S. and NATO discouraged Ukraine from signing an agreement and promised to support its fight against Russia. One of the most shameful things that happened during this Biden administration, and that's saying a lot because quite a few shameful things have gone down. All right, so the next one here, Ukrainian drone injures Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant workers. So Ukrainian drones injured 8 workers from the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant while they were at a nearby electrical substation. This was according to Rosatom, the Russian nuclear power company. The site of this substation is about 2.5 miles from the actual nuclear plant, which has come under frequent Ukrainian attacks since it was captured by Russian forces in February 2022 during the first days of the invasion. If you remember, it was scary. Russia first launched the invasion, and then you see there was video of Russian troops running up on this nuclear power plant. And this is said to be the biggest nuclear power plant in Europe. And it has been the site of a lot of drone attacks, Ukrainian drone attacks and shelling. So Rosatom wrote on Telegram, quote, Ukrainian armed forces attacked the Raduga substation where at the time staff from the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant were working, end quote. So the International Atomic Energy Agency, that's the UN's nuclear watchdog, the IAEA is the abbreviation, they condemned the attack, and it said that its experts, that it has inspectors based at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, and said that they saw thick smoke and heard explosions coming from near the plant. The IAEA said that as a result of the attack, the substation was out of service, but the nuclear power plant was still receiving the electricity that it needed to cool reactors and for other basic essential nuclear safety functions. So Rafael Grossi, the head of the IAEA, said, quote, it is extremely concerning that these drone attacks are continuing despite the very clear dangers they present to people in Enerhodor, as well as to the safety at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. They must stop immediately, end quote. So Enerhodor, I might be pronouncing that wrong. That is the town that the nuclear power plant is in. And that's on the south bank of the Dnieper River in the Zaporizhzhia Oblast. And on the other side of the river is Ukrainian-controlled territory. So Russia controls one side, Ukraine controls the other. Ukraine tried to take control of the nuclear power plant. They launched several failed raids. The one I always talk about when we're discussing this power plant is there was a report from the Times, the Times of the London Times, that said the U.S. backed one of these raids to try to take back the plant in October 2022. They supported this raid by providing targeting data so Ukraine could use its U.S.-provided HIMARS rocket systems, which hit Russian positions on the southern bank of the Dnieper River near the nuclear power plant. So just the fact that there was this battle going on near the power plant, it's just not something you want to read about, especially when it's the U.S. was that involved in the operation. But of course that failed. Russia still controls it. They controlled it. It was February. So what did they launch the invasion in February 22nd, I believe, or the 24th, I forget. But it was just a few days after that they actually captured this plant. All right, so the next one here, Israel sends delegation for hostage negotiations. So Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu told President Biden on Thursday that he agreed to send a delegation for renewed indirect hostage deal negotiations with Hamas. The conversation came a day after Hamas said that it gave new ideas to Qatari mediators that U.S. and Israeli officials described in comments to the media as a breakthrough. So there's all these reports saying, oh, this is, there's progress being made here. But there are signs that Netanyahu and members of his government are working to sabotage the chances of an agreement. What is Hamas's big demand? It's a permanent ceasefire. Apparently, from what it was tough to kind of interpret. There's all these media reports. It's hard to follow these it's hard to really know if things are really moving along here. But from what I understand, from what I gathered from all the different reporting in Israeli media, American media, Arab media, that essentially it's still based on that outline President Biden unveiled at the end of May. And it looks like Hamas is willing to agree to more vague language when it comes to the ceasefire, the permanent ceasefire, and the transition from the first phase to the second phase. But what does Netanyahu do? He talks to Biden, and in that conversation, he says that he's going to send the negotiators, but he also reiterates his position that this genocidal war in Gaza will not end until all of Israel's objectives are completed, which includes the eradication of Hamas. And that's a goal the Israeli military said is not possible. But so you still have Netanyahu, and that's what sabotaged the last chance at a deal, was Netanyahu saying, we're not going to end this thing. We're not going to agree to a permanent ceasefire. We're not going to pull out of Gaza. So that's what he's doing again here, it seems like. And Hamas has been adamant that any hostage deal must include a permanent ceasefire. The Times of Israel reported that in a meeting with his negotiators before deciding to send a delegation, Netanyahu stressed again that the war will end only after achieving all of its goals and not one moment earlier. So Ynet, the Israeli outlet, the Hebrew language version, reported that Netanyahu was teaming up with some of his, the extremist elements of his government to sabotage its ceasefire. That's Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich that they're referring to there. The report said that the prime minister's office actually planted a fake story in the media claiming to be a security source that said Hamas's response offered nothing new. And then apparently Israeli security and intelligence officials were angered by this kind of fake story. And according to Haaretz, genuine Israeli security sources said that Hamas's proposal gave Israel something to work with. So it does look like the military does want to, it's tough to piece all the clues together, and they could be trying to spin a narrative, but it does seem like the Israeli military wants a ceasefire. They don't want a permanent ceasefire, but they do want some kind of deal. They know they're going to kill the hostages, more and more hostages as this thing goes on. But yeah, it still looks like Netanyahu and because he's beholden to Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, who could sink the government and force elections when they choose to. And Netanyahu wants to keep his hold on power. And it's not like, the military is having some moment where they're like, oh, we got to stop killing all these Palestinians. No, the fact is they're struggling to eradicate Hamas. They keep popping up again, no matter how much they destroy these cities. And they got a war in Lebanon to prepare for. So, but anyway, again, if you go read any kind of media right now, it's saying, oh, things are moving along. There's a breakthrough. There's a chance of a deal. But, we've seen this before, so I don't want to be too optimistic about it. But hopefully for the people, for the Palestinians in Gaza, there is some progress toward a ceasefire. All right, so this next story here, this is a really horrific one. It's from Sky News. Newborn babies now have little chance of survival in Gaza. Hospital director warns. So the chances of a newborn baby surviving in Gaza now are not good. On the malnutrition ward at the Kamal Adwan Hospital in northern Gaza, babies only days old and often premature fight for their lives. Mothers are so malnourished themselves that they cannot breastfeed, and so babies are dying, literally starving to death because they cannot get the vital nutrition that newborns need. And if you watch this video report, they show babies who they're saying, this baby right here is just I mean, they have no food for it, and it's just dying, just slowly dying. They showed a 3-year-old who was only 11 pounds. Apparently, though, thank God, that 3-year-old was evacuated out of Gaza to get treatment. But you have all these babies basically just sitting around waiting to die, fighting for their lives. And the doctor, the hospital's director, said that within 2 weeks, they detected more than 250 patients suffering from malnutrition. He said, quote, "This was all detected in one hospital, our hospital, which means the number will most likely increase in the coming days. We asked the world to allow the entry of food and the entry of clean water," end quote. So the body of a baby that didn't pull through lies in a hospital incubator awaiting burial. She was born 2 months premature because her mother was so exhausted. Too soon for her parents to even name her. Her tiny body is now wrapped in a green shroud. Another struggles for each breath. The bones of her exposed ribcage heave up and down with the little strength she has to keep living. Their nappies dwarf their skeletal body. So if you want to watch the report, it's pretty rough. It's in the story here. It's just so horrific. And this is the war. It's a war on children. It's a war on babies. It's a war against civilians. That's what, makes it genocide. When you see things like this, it's just so horrible. Yet the U.S. continues to support this. I mean, one of these babies dying or starving should be enough to end all of this. All right, so the next one here, Israeli lawmaker suggests nuclear attack on Iran. This is from Brett Wilkins, a longtime Israeli lawmaker and former defense minister, took to the airwaves and social media on Wednesday to suggest his country should do whatever it takes to prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons. He said, quote, "It is not possible anymore to stop the Iranian nuclear program with conventional means, and we will have to use all the means that are available to us. We will have to stop with the deliberate policy of ambiguity, and it needs to be clear what is at stake here. What is at stake here is the future of this nation, the future of the state of Israel, and we will not take any risks," end quote. So this is Avigdor Lieberman. He's the leader of the right-wing Yisrael Be'tayina party. And yeah, so he's talking about nukes here. When he's saying we have to stop this deliberate policy of ambiguity, Israel doesn't officially declare its nuclear stockpile. It's believed that they have around a few hundred nuclear warheads. And we just saw the other day, I went over a story. It was like a Israeli defense industry guy saying, we have these weapons if things really escalate in the region. And so he was asked again, kind of pressed about this, like, what do you mean by stopping Iran with non-conventional means? And he replied, quote, "I said it very clearly. Right now, there is no time to stop the Iranian nuclear program, their weaponization by using conventional means," end quote. So there's still no sign that Iran is making nuclear weapons. That's a big key piece of information here. But this is a threat. If things really escalate in Lebanon, there is the potential for war with Iran. And this is, I think, a threat that, we have nukes and we can use them on Iran if we wanted to. And that's something people, do have to keep in mind, that Israel does have nuclear weapons, and considering what they're doing in Gaza, I think they'd be willing to use them. And I even think, which is just so crazy to say, but I think it's probably true. I think the U.S. would still back them even if that happened. It's, that's just how crazy and just how willing the U.S. is to just support Israel no matter what it does. All right, so the next one here, Hezbollah fires over 200 rockets at northern Israel military targets. So this article is from Jason Ditz. Yesterday, an Israeli attack on the southern Lebanese city of Tyre killed a Hezbollah commander named Mohammed Name Nasser. So Nasser was reportedly the head of the Aziz unit. So in response, Hezbollah fired over 200 rockets against northern Israel, targeting military sites, including the occupied Golan Heights. Israel reported that a number of the rockets and an estimated 10 drones were intercepted. So according to Israeli officials, one IDF reservist was killed in this rocket barrage, and the strikes set several fires, which Israeli forces are still trying to get under control. And Jason wrote this in the evening on Thursday. So situation on the border is still very tense, still lots of fire being exchanged, and the reports are circulating that Israel is planning to start an invasion in the latter half of July. So we will see. And as Jason mentions, we've had previous reports of warnings of Israel invading in June. There's been a lot of bluster from the Israeli side, but we haven't seen an invasion yet. So, but it's still important to cover this stuff, those threats and everything, because you never know, it could happen. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. has no plans to withdraw from Syria. So maybe this doesn't sound like news, but I thought it might be worth covering. A State Department official has told Rudow that the U.S. has no plans to withdraw its troops from Syria. So the U.S. has about 900 troops in eastern Syria, and it backs the Kurdish-led SDF, allowing Washington to control and occupy about 1/3 of the country's territory. The U.S. claims the occupation is about fighting ISIS remnants, but the continued U.S. presence is more about keeping Damascus and its ally Iran out of the area and controlling oil. They want to control the oil resources. The occupation is also part of the economic campaign against government-controlled Syria, which includes crippling sanctions, and those are specifically designed to prevent the country's reconstruction. Antony Blinken has said that that's the whole purpose. So, of course, it has a devastating impact on the civilians that live there. So this is Ethan Goldrich. He's the Assistant Deputy Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs. He said the U.S. would not leave Syria until its mission was completed, referring to anti-ISIS operations. But again, we know what it's really about. He said, quote, "We are not planning to withdraw from Syria. We are planning to continue and complete our mission to prevent a resurgence of ISIS and to counter ISIS and to work with our partners." Goldrich, end quote. Goldrich also said the U.S. occupation was about holding the regime accountable, referring to the government of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. He also reiterated U.S. opposition to regional countries normalizing with Damascus, as Arab nations have accepted that Assad is not going anywhere and they are reestablishing relations with the Syrian leader. So another reason why I covered this, earlier this year, there were reports that suggested the U.S. was considering a Syria withdrawal when they started talks, when Iraq was asking them to leave. But it seems like they have placated al-Sudani, the Iraqi prime minister, for now. So, of course, if they don't have to leave Iraq, that means they're not going to have to leave Syria. There's about 2,500 U.S. troops in Iraq, but that presence supports, is important in supporting the occupation of Syria. So unfortunately, no sign. And both of these, the troops in Syria, the troops in Iraq, they serve as a major, tripwire for potential war with Iran, especially as things escalate. In Lebanon, if things really explode, the militias in Syria and Iraq are probably going to get involved. The U.S. will probably hit them. You just never know what that's going to lead to. All right, so the last story here, the U.S. is going to pull a missile system out of the Philippines. So on Thursday, the Philippines said that the U.S. was pulling out a new missile system that it deployed to the Southeast Asian country for annual military exercises. The U.S. sent the Typhoon missile system for the Balikatan exercise, which were held in April and May. So the Typhoon is a controversial launcher since it would have been banned by the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, the INF, and that's a treaty that used to exist between the U.S. and Russia that the Trump administration withdrew from in 2019, and that prohibited land-based missile systems with a range between 310 and 3,400 miles. The Typhoon can fire Tomahawk missiles, which are nuclear capable and have a range of about 1,000 miles. And this is why they pulled out of the agreement, because they wanted to station these missile launchers near China. The Philippines said this one's going back to the U.S. and that was the plan. And as far as I understood it, they were just deploying them for the exercises. I didn't even realize it was still there. But it's just, I think, an important story. This is just a very provocative thing that the U.S. is doing, because they're designing these missile systems. They send them over there for big drills in the Philippines. And what do they tell the media? They say this is how we're preparing for war with China. If China attacks Taiwan, we're going to pound them with this new missile system that we're making. Or if there's war in the South China Sea, we're going to hit them with this new missile system. And Putin also mentioned this recently. I covered earlier this week that he said Russia should follow the U.S. in developing these missile systems that were previously banned by the INF. And he mentioned that they were recently sent to the Philippines, and they were also recently sent to Denmark. So they've been to Europe as well. All right, so that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our Viewpoints, one from Ted Snyder. The NATO summit is on July 9th, but Zelensky is already angry. One from Ray McGovern, will Putin attack Poland and the Baltics? One from Ramsey Baroud, growing up in New Suret, where massacres become routine. One from Doug Bandow, should Americans die for a single Filipino? One from Hekman Abuk Hatter, that's militainment. Big Hollywood succumbs to the Pentagon Borg. That is over at Responsible Statecraft, about the U.S. military involvement with Hollywood movies and stuff. So check all that out, please. And one thing I forgot to mention yesterday, I forgot to wish everybody a happy 4th of July, a happy Independence Day. I'm recording this a little before midnight on the 4th of July. So if you had the day off, I hope you had a good time. If you celebrated, I hear some people blowing things up around my house right now. But anyway, so you could support this show, tell your friends, like, subscribe, all that stuff helps out. Appreciate everyone who's back listening after my long vacation. Happy to see people are back into the swing of listening and watching this show. I will be back after the weekend. Got a couple days off now, but I will be back with the show for Monday. I'll talk to you then. Thanks for listening.